This is another episode of Design Your Dream Home with Doug and Steve. And now the architects, Doug Patt and Stephen Chung.
You are watching or listening to the Design Your Dream Home with Doug and Steve. I am Steve, that is Doug. Good morning, Doug.
Hello, good morning. Good to see you, Stephen.
Good to see you. I want to talk today about additions. What do you think?
Additions, absolutely. We do a lot of those. Love to talk about it.
Okay. So, I used to be asked to do a lot of additions. I think it's often a project that young architects get. It's maybe one of our first projects. So I have done some additions, and people do ask about them. I live in a suburb, and people live in a house. They like the location. They need, another bedroom, or they want to expand their kitchen, or this is something that happens a lot. And I think, when I get approached these questions, the first thing I ask is, well, before we talk about an addition, what about a renovation or reusing something that you already have? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think that's great. I mean, when somebody comes to you and they tell you they want to do all this work, as an architect, it's going to cost a fortune. So you really want to discuss all of the other options first. So I think that's really important. And it says something, I think, about the architect, too, that they don't just want to do a large project and make money. They want the best thing for the owner. So I think that's really important.
I guess the thinking for me goes that everybody has a budget. And often people think, oh, I'll just do something over there and it'll be a freestanding something or an extension. And I think, okay, well, let's evaluate the spaces that you already have. So you have maybe a walkout basement that's being underutilized, or you have an attic over the garage, or an attic up in above your main floors. Can we evaluate those spaces, reuse those spaces, or use those spaces? Maybe they're being underutilized. Obviously, there's a lot of work that goes into that, but reusing something that's already there certainly is more cost effective than building a new structure. And for me, it has a lot to do with trying to avoid building new foundations. Now, foundations can be one of the more costly parts of your house. That is digging a big hole, and in our climate, that means at least 4 feet deep, building a concrete footing and walls, and then building the building on top of that. And so you're adding a lot of cost, a lot of complication of how you tie that new structure into the existing. So I try to first evaluate whether this is the best solution, or this is the best direction. I guess, what are your thoughts about that, Doug?
Well, I think it's really important. As I said, you've got to make the client believe that their best interest is in mind,
Okay.
when you're doing something for them. So I absolutely would agree. When we pour a foundation, we're spending money. Basements are even more money. Crawl spaces cost money. Slab on grade costs money. So we want to avoid, if we can, putting an addition on the house. If they need more space, we're going to end up doing that. But at the end of the day, I think it's a great idea to evaluate what you've got in the house, and maybe we can renovate the house, and maybe the addition ends up being a little bit smaller too.
Right. Okay, good. So that's the first question. It's really addition versus renovation. I'm finding that, I always find that obviously renovation is less costly, renovating an existing space than an addition. Often then you have more money for, improving the quality of that renovation. So that's something to definitely consider when evaluating how you want to sort of expand your house, I guess, in terms of square footage, usable square footage. All right, Doug. So I guess I don't know if that was my first tip, but that was really probably the first kind of consideration before someone says, hey, I want to do an addition, Steve. I say, well, let's just evaluate what you have. And so that's my first kind of tip. What is your first tip, Doug?
My first tip has to do with roof lines. It's really one of the last things that people think about when they're putting on an addition is, what's the roof going to look like? And if you go out your front door and drive down the street, especially in an older neighborhood, you're going to find very quickly that happens a lot to people. So let's talk about the addition process. So people get an idea in their mind about what they need in terms of making the house a little bigger. So maybe it's a master bedroom suite, maybe it's a family room addition. Those are pretty common themes with people, and they think about, what's the floor plan going to look like and where's it going to go? But rarely do they think about on their own, how is the roof going to actually interact with the existing home. So what will happen is people dream up this idea, they go to a contractor, the contractor says, hey, I could put together a sketch and then we'll get rolling. So I would hope, and it happens more times than not, I think, today, that you've got to submit some drawings to the town. And the reason, while that, bureaucracy tends to drive me bananas, that's a really important part of the process, because evaluating your building in plan and elevation helps you to resolve these issues of how does that new addition work with the existing house and what happens with the roof lines, right? Mm-hmm. So if I'm going to put an addition on my house, maybe it's a single-story addition and the house is 2 stories. So that's one condition. So you've got a flat facade that your building is then butting up against, and you've got to think about, okay, well, how does the gable roof or the shed roof work with that flat facade? But what happens more times than not when we put a building next to another building, we end up interacting with the building such a way that it's hitting windows, for example. Mm-hmm. So you've got that roof line coming right back and it's butting into windows. What are you going to do? You're going to get rid of the window? Or are you going to create a cricket or a depression in the roof, and you're going to keep those windows? So definitely something to think about. More so when you're putting, let's say, a single-story addition against a 2-story building. But more times than not, you're putting a 2-story building next to a 2-story building, and then how does that new roof intersect the existing roof? Again, is it a gable roof or is it a shed roof? Are you creating a valley condition where in the Northeast, for example, we get a lot of snow, and that snow will sit up there, and then it gets a little warmer, and then it starts to get wet underneath the snow, and then it gets really cold at night. Everything freezes, and if it's sitting in a valley, it over time will create a condition where you've got roof leaks. So, and I would also say, look at a lot of buildings today, and they're all about new construction in residential neighborhoods. They're all about these gables, and it's one gable sitting next to another. How do you put an addition on a building like that? And, when you think about it, most of the time you're not doing an addition to the front of a house, but those gables do affect the rear facade and the side facade. So anyway, definitely something to think about how it's going to meet the new building. Other things to think about: what is the roof pitch going to be? So on new construction, we see a lot of 412 roofs. These are common roof pitches. We can get truss systems that are inexpensive, and that's probably why you see that a lot. So what is the pitch of the new roof of the new addition? What is the material? So if I've got an asphalt shingle roof and I want to put a new addition on, is that going to be asphalt shingle? And then if it's going to be new asphalt shingle, what does it make the existing house roof look like? So that can be a challenge. What are the gutter configurations going to be? I know this stuff is really boring.
Yeah. No, it's
but
not boring.
Architects need to think about, or owners need to think about, what are the gutters going to look like, and are they tying into existing conditions? Are they completely new conditions? And then where is the water going? So is the water coming right off the roof? Is it going into a gutter and then a downspout? And then ultimately, where does that downspout lead? Is it dumping water out onto my property? Is it going into drain leaders and going into a foundation drain system? And these things are important to think about, particularly in more expensive neighborhoods, because there's lots of regulations about where is the water going now that I'm putting on an addition. What you're doing is when it rains, the water seeps slowly into the ground. When it hits asphalt, right, asphalt surface, impervious surface, or roof surface, it's coming down, it's leaving the building faster, which creates adverse conditions around the building. So we got to think about where that water is ultimately going. And then lastly, the pitch or the drainage conditions around the house. So is your house sit on a flat surface, a relatively flat topography, or is it pitched? Is water moving away quickly or slowly? So lots to think about in terms of your roof and your roof lines when you're doing an addition.
No, there's a lot there, and you've done more homes with more traditional homes, I guess, with more complex roof shapes. But I think when you're working in plan, it's sort of easy to say, oh, let me add a space here or here. Yep. I think the real challenge is three-dimensionally, what's happening now? Because just because I've added this box in plan, well, what's that doing in elevation, as you had mentioned? And for me, I like to work in a 3D program so I can really study that, because, I mean, there is a complex roof, let's say, existing. You're adding this box. That box has a roof of some sort. How does this geometry meet with this geometry? How do you meld those two? That's a really good point. And how you meet those two so that it's sort of nice artfully done, but also now have you created? You've changed now the direction of the slope. You've changed the way the rain's going to come. You have to sort of deal with the gutters and existing gutters and add new gutters, and all of these are very good points. So the roof line is a very important point, especially with a more traditional home. I mean, you really have, there's a lot to consider there.
Yep, absolutely.
So you got to work in elevation as well as plan. Again, everyone loves to sketching in plan, but how do you really sort of figure out the three-dimensional kind of consideration? That's good. It's a very good point.
Yep.
All right, so let me say, okay, great. So my second tip is sort of related to what you're talking about, and it has to do with having an older home. And now I've been approached this kind of assignment on several occasions. Somebody has an older home, a nice home, but wants something modern. They want to attach something modern to this older home. How do they do that, or how can we do that? And typically, it's not easy to, let's say, take a flat roof, contemporary modern style, and add it to an older home, especially if that home has, it's a good quality home, it's authentic, and I know you've done a lot of these, but, I don't like to bastardize something which I think has a lot of integrity. I want to try to find an artful way to have something complement what's there. And typically what I've done is create something called a transitional element, a connector, if you will. Imagine having a more traditional home and wanting a pool house, which is a recent assignment, and that connector piece is actually a trellis, an overhead trellis, which somehow is the same material, the same color as what's on the existing home. At the same time, it's the same as what's happening on the addition. It's sort of that transitional piece. Same material, same color, but then the architecture changes. It comes from something very traditional, something more modern, and I think it's complementary. It doesn't look like kind of a mistake that the modern addition is somehow, while it's quite different, it complements what's there. It's sort of the best of the new and the old, and really define what that transitional piece is. And so for my own home, I had a sort of 50s style looking first floor. I mean, I built it, but it's sort of 50s style. One-story home. I knew later if I had kids that I would want to have a second floor. So we did add a second floor, but the idea with the second floor is that while it's contemporary, I didn't want it to look and feel like the first floor. So again, you think about the overall composition. I don't want it to look like, two different hands. I just want to find a way to have two different sort of feelings. And that connector, that transitional element, was the stair. And so the stair became that moment where it became from one world to the other world. In this case, it really was something which was sort of more, I don't know, it was darker wood, more intimate down below. Upstairs was lighter, brighter, and that stair piece became that transitional element. Now, there's a couple of images there that sort of show how I dealt with that condition. So, Doug, any thoughts about this connector piece? Because I've seen some of your projects where you do exactly that. You have a really artfully done connector piece. What are your thoughts on that sort of approach?
Oh, I think it's the way to go. I think when you're adding on to particularly a traditional piece of architecture, it's very, very hard to do something contemporary. So I think of I.M. Pei's addition to the Louvre, for example, and that is a profound example of how that can be done artfully. You've got two pieces of architecture there, and they are completely different, and that's really why it works. So I would warn architects, I would warn owners and architects. It's a very difficult thing to do well, and there are, history has lots of examples of these things done very poorly. But in terms of thinking about this, the notion that there is a kind of connecting piece which makes that transition is really the way to go. It's the right way to think about transitioning from one style to another. And in working with Joe Moore in Greenwich, we do this an awful lot. And, well, not an awful lot, but it happens. And it's a challenge to do it well. And so thinking about the space that you're moving through, this stair space, this connecting space, the hallway spaces as the connecting piece or the glue between functional elements, I think it's a very nice way to organize it in your mind and then ultimately organize space. It's the right way to do it.
It's interesting because where you work in Greenwich, you have a lot of beautiful old homes, and you have people that, while they appreciate and love that old home, they want something maybe which is a lot more glass, and maybe it's a very different kind of feeling. Almost imagine a conservatory, which doesn't look exactly like what's there. It has a very different character, a very different quality, but it can very nicely coexist with the old. And so I think it's a difficult task, but I think a good architect can do that. And so you have a lot of good examples. So no, I appreciate and respect your opinion on that subject. Okay, Doug, what is your third tip?
Let's see here. Actually, I think we're at second tip.
Oh, sorry, second tip.
Yeah, no, it's okay. So my second tip is also something that people tend to forget about until they're right in the middle of the project. And I've got to admit that I don't like thinking about this stuff either, because it's kind of boring, but it's all the functional stuff. So think about where your mechanical runs are going to be when it comes to the new addition. So you've got a mechanical plant in your home. Let's say it's a heat pump and it's in your basement. And then I'm putting an addition on and it's all the way at the other side of the house or the property. How am I going to get everything to that location? We also have plumbing, which can be a real challenge as well. So there's lots of mechanical systems to make your house comfortable. How are you going to incorporate all that new stuff with the existing stuff? So let's think about, well, I'll use an example of a project that I did locally a few years ago. We did an addition renovation, and it was a traditional house, and the addition was traditional as well. So I drew up the plans, and I drew a basement. So we were going to put a new basement, which we attached to the existing basement. Well, we fortunately hired a contractor to come in right at the end of schematic design. He looked at that. First thing he said was, hey, if we've got a budget, this is going to be really expensive. We're going to need a basement. We're going to need to break open the existing foundation walls and go in. We've got to make sure we're not undermining anything, which is probably a subject for another talk as well. But we've got to be really careful about the new construction. It's expensive. So you might want to think about doing a crawl space instead. And that would solve, some of the challenges. We can run mechanical equipment through that crawl space. So we looked at the crawl space. It was ultimately priced, and we're like, oh boy, that's expensive too, right? Because we're creating not conditioned space down there, but we're moving a slab down a few feet. The foundation needs to be a little bit more substantial, so it's going to cost some money. So we ultimately went to a slab on grade solution for this a new addition. Well, the challenge was we've got mechanical systems. So think about plumbing, for example. Now, if I hadn't done really detailed drawings showing precisely where the toilets were, where all the new drains were, we would have a real challenge, because you've got to locate all that stuff, because all of that plumbing gets buried within that slab system, right? So you've got to locate all that stuff, run all the pipes, then you pour your slab. So you have to be pretty precise when it comes to that, doing slab on grade. So the other challenge we had was, how do we get all of the duct work to this new addition? Well, we had to, instead of going low, we had to go high. So that's heating and air conditioning. Now, air conditioning, not that big of a deal, but at least I was taught in school, it's not that smart to be blowing hot air down, because hot air rises. So you really want all your hot air to come in low. Well, that would have meant burying all these ducts, which was not going to work. So we ended up running all the duct work in the attic and pushing all the air down, both hot and cold air. So it worked, but it's a challenge. So when you're doing an addition, you want to think about, how am I going to get all the mechanical systems into that new addition? How am I going to make that new addition comfortable, or as comfortable as your existing home?
So Doug, here's a question for you, and I'm asking because I actually really want to know this for your work. Yeah. When you are doing HVAC, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, do you have an engineer, a separate engineer, make all those calculations, or do you work with a contractor directly and do a kind of a design build? Wow, yeah, go ahead.
Great. That's a great question, man. Most of the projects that we work on, I will work directly. Well, let me back up. Most of the jobs that we do, I don't like to do a bidding. I don't like to get into a bidding process, right, where there's lots of contractors bidding on a job. So I like to bring in the contractor early. That would be at the end of schematic design. And he usually has a guy that he likes to work with. Now, he may choose to bid that portion of the project out to 3 guys that he likes. But what will happen is if you got a guy on board early in the process, you can give them schematic drawings, design development drawings, and they can start designing the system early in the process. So to answer your question, we will usually have a mechanical contractor design the system. At least this is the way I like to do it, rather than bringing in an MEP early in the job, which can be pretty expensive.
Right.
So you hire the guy and you know he's going to do the system and he designs the system, and it's not going to cost nearly as much or anything because it's part of his price to do that. So yes.
But you don't hire a separate mechanical engineer.
We do.
You do.
We do in some jobs. Some jobs we do, but the projects that I'm involved with where we're not bidding out the job and we don't need that information, well, we need that information right away. So it's good to bring somebody in early. If we're not going to bring in a contractor early, we will hire an MEP to do that, but it's expensive.
Yeah, same for me. Commercial projects, I'll always have an engineer, mechanical, electrical, plumbing engineer. For residential, usually not. It's like, as you mentioned, we bring in a contractor, a mechanical contractor. We work with them. They advise on the proper systems. We tell them what they're looking for. They create the drawings, and that's the way we've sort of done it. So they call that design build.
Yep.
So no, that's a great point. You had mentioned about this mechanical, and we had this issue when I was growing up. We built an addition on our house, our suburban house, and to save money, I guess, the contractor basically said, "Oh, we can just tap off your existing system to provide the ventilation, air conditioning for that room." Now that room was going to be a sunroom, right? Which would have increased demand, and why we thought that somehow just tapping off an existing system without creating a bigger system or another system altogether was obviously a mistake and something to really carefully evaluate when creating an addition. Someone may say, "Hey, let's save money. We can just tap off of what's there."
Right.
You really need to have a contractor kind of evaluate how much, how
much additional air volume.
Yeah, the volume. How much more volume do you need? Whether it can really support this, or do you need something else, or do you add to the system, or do you create another system altogether? So
very good.
That's definitely something to consider.
Yep.
Okay, so that's great. My third tip, we are on tip number 3, and I'm sort of skipping ahead for a second, but I'm just having this problem right now, and it has to do with gathering the proper legal documents, because when you're inside your home and you're renovating, you may be required to have a permit, but you are not increasing the square footage of a project. You are not adding on to. As soon as you start to add on to, you need to know what your property allows. Typically, every house has a plot plan of some sort, a document which really shows where your house sits in your property, that it abides by the proper setbacks, that is it's far enough away from the front road, from the side, from the back, and that it conforms. Some are non-conforming, but because the house is already there, it can stay there. But it's really important, because when you're adding something new, you have to make sure that your new is within what's allowable, within the setbacks. And in some cases, mistakes are made. So I would just tell you right now, we are working on a project in the city. It's a big project. And so what's happened is we did the drawings, and the drawings clearly show that the foundation of this big building will sit within the proper setbacks. Now, because it's at the city, it's not like we try to build really close to the lot lines to maximize your property. In this case, they pour the foundations, and after the foundations are poured, you have something called an as-built plan. That shows, the engineer comes, surveys, and shows that here's where the walls were built. You have to do this for your house as well. And it means that, okay, what you've built is allowed. What you've built is within the setbacks. This is okay. We sign off, keep going. In this case, our setback, we violated the setback by 5 feet. They built the foundation 6 feet off of what is allowed. And so now we have a real problem, because clearly the drawings indicate where it's supposed to be. Someone in this process made a big mistake, and now they're going to have to tear this out, and at considerable expense to everybody, expense to the developer because of the time which is being lost, expense to the contractor because the contractor is going to say, "Hey, we followed the survey drawings. You put flags where we're supposed to pour our foundation, and you're wrong." So now we have a problem. Now, of course, this case is much bigger than, let's say, your little addition in your home, but the same thing can happen. If you are building somehow and it's not in the proper setback, building inspector can say, tear that out, which obviously can be pretty painful. So you really need to gather the proper legal documents. It's the plot plan. It's after it's designing the building within the lot line. It's then after pouring the foundation, making sure that it's built as designed, and then you can move forward. So there is a process there, and I think I would generally advise to have somebody who is knowledgeable about the process to be with you, meaning an architect, but somebody has to be with you to make sure that all of this is done properly. Big investment, don't want to make a mistake like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good advice. I mean, it's got to be done. It's got to be done right.
Yep. Okay, Doug, your last tip.
Third tip. This is kind of a fun one. So my tip is make sure your mutton bars match. So what is a mutton bar? Well, again, this is something that I see a lot. We have, not in my neck of the woods or the area that I do a lot of work, but in my neighborhood here, we'll see an existing house, somebody does an addition, and the windows on the new addition, the mutton bars inside of those windows don't match the existing. So mutton bar, so let's look back a couple hundred years ago when people started making windows. The individual panes of glass are separated by what's called a mutton bar. So they were a single pane of glass, then you got a piece of wood, then you got a single pane of glass. Today, what we do is what window manufacturers do is they make a window, and we use insulated glass today, right? So we want to feel comfortable in our homes. So we actually make windows today, or window manufacturers make windows with a series of panes of glass, either 2 or 3. They put argon gas in between sometimes to help as an insulator. We put films on the glass, and then your window is actually a very large pane of glass, but we add mutton bars to them many times because most of the work, at least in my neck of the woods here, is traditional, right? So we want our windows to look like old windows, but they're new windows, so we apply these mutton bars to the face of the windows. And those mutton bars can be anywhere from 1/2 of an inch wide to all the way up to 1 1/8 inches, 1 1/4 inches, even bigger, depending on how big those units are. But we do that to make windows look traditional. So my recommendation is when you're doing an addition to a house, really think about, number one, measure the mutton bars on your existing house if it's traditional, and let's match them with the new addition. You're probably going to end up spending a little bit more money to get something that looks similar to what you've got, but it's a smart thing to do. And when you do an addition to your house, you want that addition to look like it's always been there. That's one of the goals of an architect, right? So when you step back and you look at the house, you want to say, wow, well, that's clearly the new addition. Nobody likes to see that. So think about the mutton bar sizes on your existing and how they're configured as well. So a mutton bar makes a shape on the window, and that's a rectangle, and sometimes it's closer to a square. Sometimes it's closer to a very tall rectangle. So you want to think about, on the new addition, what are the proportions of the mutton bars? What do they look like, and how do they relate to the existing house? Another point just to be made quickly here is most people don't use that term mutton bar. They use the term grill, which is okay, or mullion, and mullion is not the proper term. So when we put two windows next to one another, it's called mulling the windows together. And the bar, the space in between those two windows, is a mullion. The actual separators inside of those window frames are the mutton bars, and that's spelled M-U-N-T-I-N. So there you go. Make sure your mutton bars match.
You know why that's funny is because I misuse the term. I say mullion for everything. So well, thank you for that. That's right. You're more precise than me technically. All right. So it's awesome advice. 3 tips from both of us on auditions. Oh, so now we've got a great question here, Doug. And I think we both have strong opinions about this. This is our question of the week on additions. Hi, Doug and Steve. I'm planning an addition and wonder about hiring an architect. I don't think I can afford it, but I want to understand more. I don't need a crazy design. It's pretty straightforward, but I have a feeling that having an architect would be a good idea. Gee, Doug, I wonder what your thoughts are on this subject.
Gosh. That's so great. Well, it's really nice, number one, that somebody's even asking that question. Right. So you're thinking about an architect. This isn't just my opinion. This is pretty much a fact. Your architect is going to save you money. When you hire an architect, you're getting a process, right? So it's almost like a checklist of things to do. So you start a project and you pre-design a program. You go through schematic design. You go through design development. You go through construction documents. You go through bidding and negotiation. Your architect is your representative, and he or she is helping you get through a process. There are tons of things that you will inevitably miss if you don't hire professionals. And most people say, well, I'm just going to hire a contractor. We're going to go through this process, but with a contractor. That guy's going to build my building and he's going to help me. I can guarantee you he's not going to help you as much as an architect will, because the contractor doesn't always have your best interest at heart, right? He's trying to make money. And so there are going to be things that are going to be missed or that are going to end up being more expensive because the contractor misses them or he's not being fair with you. I'm not saying contractors aren't going to help you get a great project. What I am saying is that hiring an architect will help you get through the process because of this kind of checklist that you're moving through and all the different things that the architect helps you think of that a general contractor wouldn't necessarily help you think of. And at the end of the day, I'm fairly certain you're going to save money because you're not going to make all the mistakes you would have made had you not hired that professional. What do you think, Steve?
I've got a terrible example, but it's something that I experienced. It's that I wish that they had some kind of car architect, somebody that could act as my agent, so that when I would go in to have repairs done, a mechanic will say, you need this, this, and this. And I say, I have no idea. I guess so. As opposed to someone saying, actually, we don't need that. We don't need that. We don't need that. Because I know what we need is only that. And we can, I think, get away with that. I kind of need that. I kind of need someone that's going to be my agent, that looks after me and watches after me, that I trust, that I pay him a little something, but in the end, it's going to save me a lot over here just because that person is knowledgeable and acts as my agent. And I kind of think of us sort of like that, besides the design, the beautiful design, all those things that we love to talk about, is that a homeowner, and let's say it's a contractor, again, it's not contractors are bad, it's just the idea that we're going to help that homeowner through this process, that we're supposed to understand all of these issues and really act as their agent, looking after their best interests. And that, like you, I totally agree that a good architect, because not all architects, but a good architect will save you money and give you a better project, better experience, and just make that entire experience less stressful just by being there, supporting you, and being knowledgeable about what this process is. So we're architects, so we advocate for that strongly. I would say in terms of the cost and all of these, I also think that there are scenarios where certain architects can consult. Maybe you determine that you can't avoid, you don't want to, it's not all the expense, but you still need someone to advise. And maybe there's an architect that will work with you on an hourly basis and consult and just sort of advise what you're doing in the process. And maybe not designing everything, but hey, make sure you do this, make sure you do this. Let me just review those. Let me look at that. I can look at this contract for you, make sure you feel comfortable. Maybe I can come in once a month and look at construction, see how that's going. Now, every architect is different, but I wouldn't completely just say that, oh, I can't afford it, I'm just going to try to go at it alone. I don't think an addition is a DIY project. DIY meaning, do yourself with contractor. I don't recommend that. I really think one should be looking for some help. Wow,
I love your architect example. That's great. I mean, that's the way people should think about it. Somebody that can help them sift through everything.
I feel so helpless when I go into. I know that you're into cars, but I feel so helpless when they say you need a new X and X. I said, oh God, I have no idea what that is.
Yeah, you got to work with somebody you can trust, and same thing goes for architects. Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. No product spotlight this week because it's additions as opposed to something that's like our showers, But I think this is a very meaty subject. We'll definitely be coming back to additions. I think that there's a lot having to do with planning. I know that a lot of people ask about it, so there is a lot about planning that I'd like to get back into, and maybe at that point we can find a good product.
Okay, sounds good. Well, you've been watching the Doug and Steve Show, Design Your Dream Home. Look forward to seeing you guys next time. Bye-bye.
See you next time.